All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our ITIL webinar, Improving Business with Artificial Intelligence in an ITIL 4 World. My name is Kira Roberts. I am one of our customer success specialists here on the corporate side of our business. I'll be helping Doug moderate today. My role at Centriq is managing our corporate accounts to help IT professionals seek training or obtain the latest certifications within the IT industry. Centriq Training serves as a nationwide IT and M365 training company. We're local to Kansas City and St. Louis, Missouri, with 2 physical locations. We are known for our instructor led training, either virtual live or physical classroom sessions. For those of you who are not familiar with Centriq, we are the Midwest premier IT training company. We've been established by the same ownership for over 30 years, and it's a pleasure to introduce Doug Hoff to you this morning. Doug has been with Centriq as a technical trainer for over 16 years, and before that, he's done several other cool things. But the first instructor position that I find fascinating is that he taught as a web designer and Photoshop instructor back in 1996 at the Kansas City Art Institute. Doug is now semi-retired because we cannot see him go yet, and he's loved dearly by our students who keep requesting him for specific courses. Doug's background is in Java, JavaScript, C Sharp, ITIL, business, MIS, architecture, programming, analysis, and web frameworks. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar. Doug has several slides, so be sure to ask questions after each slide and when he might pause, and because he loves the interaction, so feel free to ask those questions. Without further ado, Doug, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kira, and welcome everybody to this webinar. I've been real excited to learn a bit about how ITIL can be extended into the technology world of artificial intelligence, and it's a real fun thing for me because ITIL is usually described in our courses as a way to pass a test, and it's much more than that. It's a complete framework for working with IT management, which we'll see as we go through the description of ITIL, and then we'll go through and talk about artificial intelligence and then the applications of ITIL for artificial intelligence. I'm, as Kara said, had a few things that I've taught throughout my career. If you're interested, you can always send me an email or follow me on Twitter or look up my website, which is kind of a personal repository for links of mine. And you can always check me out on LinkedIn as well. So feel free to look me up and Doug Hoff on most of those. You will be able to find me on the web. Email, not so much. I don't leave my email on the web, but you can get a hold of me through many other means, including directly through Centriq, and they're happy to give messages or questions or whatever you need in order to respond back to you, whatever your needs are. Well, like I said, the talk is briefly going to be today about what ITIL is, an overview of that, how just the ITIL 4, because ITIL's been around for over 20 years. And we want to look at the current iteration of ITIL because it's been improving and getting better and keeping up with the different types of business systems that have evolved in project management and in development and in general management practices overall. So it's a very broad subject, and it covers the tools as well as understanding how it is that business works. And it's not a technical type of framework, it's a business framework. So it's going to help you understand the necessity of value in determining your outcomes in business and which way that you need to steer that ship into the somewhat murky waters of the marketplace out there. And then we'll take a look at artificial intelligence from a business perspective and think about, is it merely mimicking our human thought, is it, and really where it's being applied, which is mostly in data analytics and machine learning. And we'll take a look at some of the most recent applications. A couple of good places I found recently in Wall Street Journal that have been talking about how the companies today are really using the artificial intelligence. And then we'll see, where does ITIL speak to that? Because we want to see what ITIL is doing, where it applies to that. And AI is mostly talked about in a technical way. You know, what is it in terms of the systems that they do? We want to look at AI in a way that ITIL discusses those systems in terms of where's the value? How do we maintain that value? How do we manage those types of systems? And can ITIL really provide direction for that kind of thing? Because that's what it's about. AI is a technical way of designing and aiding as a tool the business decisions that are made. And then ITIL is a way of managing those decisions. ITIL itself is a type of service management practices for recommendations. It's a framework of governance, really, to say that we have a policy that gives us advice on how to do service management. So what is service management? It's a set of, according to ITIL terms, it's a set of specialized organizational capabilities. And there's all that other stuff there. Most of it is forgetful. It is easily forgettable. It's forgettable. And what I try to do in my course is kind of bring it down to real terms. And the key word that I see there is that it's enabling value. What it does is allow managers to create a business framework, a context, an environment, to be able to let people know how to create the most value. It's a structured set of principles. It's a set of guidance that has been developed over time, where we have companies that have tried things, and through their mistakes and through their successes, we've learned what works better through innovations, through academic reports, and through people that have done research and written books. We've collected all that and learned from all of what's going on in the IT world in order to put it together into some sort of consistent system that allows us to manage IT much better. And they don't give you what you need to do. They give you a set of things that you can use. It's about choosing what you want to do to manage your IT. And there's a number of great suggestions all throughout ITIL, but it doesn't mean you have to apply all of them. In fact, you're probably doing a lot of them already if you're in IT, because most people follow what other people do based on their successes. Well, we're giving you a much better collected grouping of things to look at that says, here's a whole bunch of great things to mimic and to follow, as a way that we found that really produces value and gives you a success in IT management. So we call it a guidance body of knowledge. It supports your IT management for all of the duties that you have. In fact, there's 34 different categories of management that has been made through ITIL 4. And it describes just about everything that we do, from a general business type of practice to managing individual services, or I like to use the word systems, because that's a little bit more of a recognizable term for today's world in America. We use computer systems, but a lot of people are starting to call them services, which is just about the same thing. But it comes with a few other extra definition quirks, I'd say. But in terms of what we understand today, it's how to measure, how to monitor, how to take care of, how to maintain all those systems. And the key thing about all of ITIL is it's focused on value. Value in terms of economics is what we're doing when we're in business. We're trying to create value. We're not trying to create profit. We're not trying to create anything else, because we could be a nonprofit organization. So it's not about just the profit side. It's about also creating value internally for the IT organization. It's also about creating value for any of the stakeholders or people that are involved in wanting to have some sort of benefit from these systems, from the business side of IT to any of the people that are doing business with the organization that we're a part of. ITIL's made up of about 5 major pieces. And you can see that I tried to give you a sense of perspective on what is really important in ITIL. I'd say the practices have the most information that is useful. There's 34 of them, and not all of them are trained at the low level. So as you move up and learn, or as you just gather together the documentation on ITIL, go through them, you may find that you're more interested in the security part as opposed to, say, a strategy part. So you get what you need, and out of each one of those practices, they tend to overlap with each other. And where they overlap is when you see a mapping of the activity throughout what is called the service value chain. The chain is more of a map of activity. And as you wander through that map from something that initiates the need for value, and at the end where you have an outcome of value, you end up with a value stream that tells you what you've done in order to go through each step or each activity to get something done. Throughout that activity, you probably are concerned with watching the types of rules and policies that tell you how to act. That's the how part of the ITIL. The practices are kind of the what and who. And then the chain tells you where you're going to go next in terms of what steps to take. Governance is sort of the management of other managers and giving them policies and telling them how they're going to be doing things. And ITIL is a very good governance document to provide other IT managers. And you can split it up and say, use this, but not all of it. You also have continual improvement, which is the way to keep improving everything. What is the best methodical way to go about taking care of making sure you improve and your organization keeps improving? And the last one is the 7 guiding principles. It's kind of the why do we do things. We have sort of idioms or proverbs or ways that we talk about doing things, like practice makes perfect is a good one that I used recently. But that's not one that comes from ITIL. We have other guiding principles. One is the major one. The number one is to focus on value. And we look at 6 other ones that probably came from the Agile world. Agile is very much a big influence on ITIL version 4. You can see here all of the guiding principles that have been added into version 4. And they are new to version 4. And they just are simple. It's focus on value. Start where you are, which means don't go out and buy everything that you think you're going to need in 10 years and then find out that the map has changed. And a few other ones. The iterative approach is very useful. That's very much probably from the Scrum type of Agile system. And has been popularized there, but it's really a key element of all Agile systems. Then we have collaboration and working holistically and keeping things simple. The KISS principle has been with us in IT probably for as many years as there's been any kind of machinery that was too complex. And then we have, of course, the optimize and automate, which is where DevOps is really making its mark today in IT by having lots of scripting of the final route from development through production. Governance is, like I said, the ability to give guidance to other managers so that they can make decisions. It's not making decisions and how to make those. It's not what decisions to make, it's how to make decisions. And it's a prescriptive type of thing, as they say in the documentation. It's controls and large scale kind of directions that are given. Other types of governance that you may see out there include the accounting type of governance from SOX, or healthcare from HIPAA, or even the security that is so prominent and been in the news about Europe with the GDPR. But all those are types of guidance, and ITIL is a very broad set of guidance, and these other ones are more specific to industries. The service value chain I mentioned is a kind of a map of activities of how we do things, but it's really a proprietary set of activities that you define, and they come under the categories of being able to coordinate your activities. Sort of thinking of a software project, it would be a large-scale project management type of effort, making sure you know what's going on architecturally and task-wise. You have improvements that are made constantly. You have engagement with third parties. You have designing and transitioning to each step along the way. You have choices whether to buy or build. You have choices about how to deliver the type of software to the production environment. And finally, a big thing for a lot of people that initially stepped into ITIL and why they wanted to start thinking about ITIL was, how do we support the software that we now have in our IT department? Do we set up a service desk, and what kind of service desk is it? Should we call it a service desk? We're used to calling it a help desk. Whatever works is what ITIL says. We just use a consistent set of terms, and most of the software that helps you do the work that are being offered in the marketplace right now would use ITIL terms. But if you want to use your own systems, use Excel spreadsheets and Microsoft Word documents because you're a smaller company, you can do that. It doesn't mean that you need large tools or anything. It just means you have to think a little differently than maybe you did before, with a little bit more process-minded, more data-driven type of management style. There are 34 practices, and we cover in the foundation course at Centriq, we cover the key foundational practices of dealing with service level management, which is trying to make sure that the business gets what they need from IT. Things like change control, where we talked about how changes are made to the projects. The service desk I mentioned, and on the service desk, where we deal with incidents when the level of service is dropped and maybe there is actually a bug or something that needs to be dealt with. Problem management is sort of looking for trends and incidents. And service request management, just anything else that anybody needs on that service desk is useful. And a continual improvement, you can figure that one out. That's just making sure that everything is going to be continually improved. It's we do have a 7-step process that I'll show you in just a minute. Other things that we do, we break them up into general business practices because we have to think about accounting and people management. We have service management, so most of these are related to service management. And then there's a few technical categories, like in something that would be more about like deployment. So continual improvement The last one I think is in the major categories is really about making sure that you are continuously looking at what the business wants and making sure you're aligned to making sure that the business gets what they need. And it's continually looking at it and reforming your and updating your projects and always kind of being proactive and changing the IT systems in order to maintain the level of value that business wants. Here's that 7-step continual improvement model. Kind of is broken up into 3 separate categories. First of all, you got to know where you want to go. And you also want to know where you are, a baseline approach. So in any project, in any kind of effort that you take on, you do have to have a goal in mind and know where you are. And then you can set specific goals and come up with a very metric-based approach, and then figure out how you might want to plan to get there. And then, of course, then you go out and take action and ask if you got there, was it a success? And the last step is to make sure that you can continue to make that momentum a continual thing so that people are encouraged. They see the success that happened. They find out that it's a good thing to do this kind of model because it works. And you can encourage other people to keep improving along the way. And this is all it is. It's just a simple 7 steps, and but a very powerful set of steps that when you look at it, you make sure you don't skip over something, and helps you continually improve your organization. One other part of ITIL that isn't concerned with value, because all these other things were concerned with value. The only other part of ITIL is a way of looking at IT systems. IT systems can be described in terms of 4 perspectives or views of what we see in any kind of system. You break them up into 4 areas, and those 4 areas are what's the processes, the value streams and processes, the people. There might be issues with training or organizational structuring. You might have an issue with partners and suppliers, or you might need to plan partners and suppliers into your new project. And then, of course, the one that everybody is familiar with is the information or the data structures, the data itself, and how is it going to be managed through the technology? What do we use for software? All that. Those 4 perspectives are essentially the foundation for any course in MIS, and is how we look at IT systems, or you just might as well call it systems analysis. But in ITIL, we call it the 4 dimensions. What it is a holistic view of how we look at any kind of IT system. So for each one of the processes in ITIL, it's broken down into these 4 different categories. And that way we can make sure to thoroughly view what each one of the processes is necessary to consider. And we then come up with a complete understanding of our IT systems. So that's ITIL, and in a very, very quick overview. We dig into it, of course, a lot more, including the 34 processes that are then spelled out with all of the definitions and everything in terms of how we use them and how they interact and so on. But they are all interconnected. And if you'd like any questions before we move on, I'm willing to take them about ITIL itself in version 4. Okay, feel free to add it to the chat. Let's talk about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is a term that has been thrown around and started early, but it's people have gotten somewhat of a bad taste in their mouth, at least in the industry where people are using it or developing it, because it seems like the artificial intelligence that people think they know about is not exactly what artificial intelligence is in terms of what's actually being used. But in the last couple of years, I can see where we're starting to converge a little bit more towards a more real perspective of what AI is and what AI can do. We were thinking back in 20 years ago when AI was starting to be a thing, where we considered it to be a training of the machines to think like us. We wanted machines to have speech and sight and actions and make decisions and interpret data like us. We wanted them to possibly take over jobs and do things. And just like we think robots are going to take over the world, like it's a Terminator type of thing, people are afraid of the eventuality of AI taking over or robots taking over, but I can assure you that's not going to happen. People are in full control of what AI is, but they may kind of put it on autopilot and let some things go. But it was actually, according to some authors of AI, I'll give you some references to some books here as at the end. But AI is really was kind of oversold at the beginning. You may recognize Eric Schmidt of Google, a former CEO. He was actually one of the people that kind of oversold AI, and he wanted to tell people it had so many good things out there. The quote was that from the book Genius Makers was that it wasn't anywhere near what people were trying to tell people that AI could do. And because it was sort of a system that needed a lot of human intervention and help. Now we're getting better, and some systems are now fairly confident that they don't need as much human intervention, but they still do. So there is that need. It's not a autonomous type of system that's going to be able to do things without you helping it. The main thing that we use in AI that's considered a part of AI is the machine learning aspect. And AI is, or the machine learning part is what really contributes to giving us good weather reports. I don't know if you can call them good weather reports all the time, but in general, a weather report is nothing more than a set of past weather activity and looking at as many possible sets of data at the highest resolution possible to look at, and as many variables as possible to look for trends and any kind of correlations that is going to help us figure out what is going on with the weather. Most people are concerned with that. We've invested billions of dollars into systems and models to try to figure out how the weather works. But as you know, we can't tell what tomorrow is going to be, but we can guess, and we can have a pretty good guess. And essentially, that's what machine learning is. It's a very statistically based type of ability to guess. So our computer, just like us, when we have an intuition that says it's going to be, it feels kind of rainy out there, better take an umbrella. That's what machine learning is going to do for us. It's going to say, I think you'd better take an umbrella today. So it'll help you make decisions. A lot of people want machine learning and other things to make decisions for you. And we've had a number of unfortunate incidents where machines, when left to their own decision making, have not made the right decisions to some bad conclusions. A number of them used were probably concerned through automobile driving, where they would have learned the terrain, learned all sorts of things, but they still made wrong decisions about who was in front of them or what obstacle was there or anything else. And unfortunately, the end result wasn't good. So what we're doing is using the best type of machinery based on the best data sets that we can get. So we're really trying to make a good decision based on good data, and it requires good data. So the weather is made, the weather reports are made from as many good data sets as we can get. So it's not really a scientific principles that we apply. It's more of a, let's get together as many good examples and look at what we had happened afterwards and see if we can predict through probability how it's going to come out. So in the medical field, same thing. Let's get together as many eye pictures as we can, see if the pictures correspond to a diagnosis and future things that have happened to the eye, and then throw a new picture at it and see if it can predict correctly. So it's kind of an expert at things. You might have called it deep learning in the past, where at the very first, the researchers used it to try to find cats in a number of YouTube videos. That was an easily testable type of experiment. Now, you see things that are useful for credit card fraud detection. And I know that it wasn't probably the person that looked at my account that said, you've been making a strange transaction on your credit card lately. Is this normal? And it flagged it to the credit card folks in the fraud department, and they immediately, or the systems immediately, sent out text messages to me and had me interact with the person to verify that it wasn't a fraud thing. But it could have been. And I've had some fraud on my credit cards, and I've had false flags that were just making sure that the unusual activity that I had, because I was in a different country at the time or doing something with a large amount of money, was different from my normal activity. So all it can do is detect when it's not normally the types of activity that occurred. The Internet of Things is really providing a lot of data, and AI needs data. So the Internet of Things has helped promote our ability for using good data sets. And the more that we use the Internet of Things, the more data we get, the more we can probably predict with a fair accuracy if things are consistently happening the same way. So as long as things are somewhat stable, we can do a pretty good job of that. Now, you know, in business, some things change very quickly, and we wouldn't want to use AI for how to kind of chart our course based on, we've just had a major inflationary type of a flag, because we know that I've been reading that housing prices or people are expecting that we're going to, yeah, well, the house builders are expecting to build a lot, but the house buyers are not expecting to buy. And there's utility, different types of appliances in houses are not expected to be purchased in the next 6 months. So AI can't really predict that, but they can follow the trend and say, well, if that's going to go on, we need to feed that information in and see what the probability is that we should change our purchasing and our lines of products. But what we have to do is make sure that we put in the right information first. So we have to collect and monitor and do the right information, get the right information, so that we can get out the right information. And that's nothing more than the standard term garbage in, garbage out. So AI depends on good data going in. and Internet of Things can provide us lots of sensors to contribute to information going in. But of course, we have to design it correctly first. AI has been around since the 1950s, and we've been able to store information a lot better. Our network speeds to transfer transactions and data is better. We've been able to get better data collection methods. So it's kind of been coming for a long time. We kind of knew that, but people weren't too sure. And back in the 50s when we were just looking for cats, or it wasn't the 50s, but when we started looking for cats, you know, it didn't look very promising, but it's getting better, and it probably still will increase in its value as the systems tend to be more accessible and more customizable and easier available, probably not just to the larger companies, but to smaller companies for their benefit. We do have challenges in AI, though, and that is we can get too much information. Information tends to flood as you get too much, and then what do? You have people that are overwhelmed, and the data department that is working with your data can really be overwhelmed, and so that's a data management type of challenge. We also, as people, have to eliminate the bias that we have in making decisions, because we can not only as development people build in bias into how we make the system think, we can also build in bias in terms of the data that we provide to the systems. We want to make sure that we continually improve those things by adding or changing the variables that are analyzed in our AI systems. And then there's always this one that I came up with called the manager over your shoulder complex. And that is, if you're dealing with AI, that means that somebody is always thinking about the end result and kind of monitoring or thinking about you. If Amazon's employees know that they're expected to do a certain number of tasks per hour, and that they'll get fired if they don't complete so many tasks per hour, and the system has set the goals for your tasks to be a certain amount, you're essentially trying to work with a manager who doesn't have an open door policy. The policy was probably set by the computer system based on trends and the data set that was fed to it, and came up with an answer of how many tasks that you were supposed to do. So it's really kind of a, not quite an overlord, but at least a manager that's continually giving you advice about what the goal or your work effort should be. And to me, that's a little bit of a constraint in working. You don't feel quite as free to do your own thing. So we have to think about that. Is that going to squelch any kind of innovation in people's performance? And we are trading off a human manager for a more automated manager in this case, where human managers wouldn't be continually checking as we have the ability to do with AI. A couple of things I saw in the Wall Street Journal that were useful, I thought, to look at and ponder in terms of the current usage of AI is how Levi Strauss, the jeans maker, is going to increase a much bigger chunk of its capital expenditures to help it come back and bounce back after the COVID, that people weren't buying things, going out and shopping. And now what they want to do is sort of bump that back up. And now it's a good, they determined it was a good time to invest now to be more of a market leader. Because as everybody else is sort of weighed down, it's a good time to start running strong. And they decided to invest in where they thought they'd get the most advantage, which is in analyzing the data and using AI. So they're using that to try to figure out where consumers are going to go and to set the right prices on their products. And you can see the article if you want to go check it out in the Wall Street Journal from April 13th. Another one that I saw just this morning was about how Geico is going to try and feed a number of photographs. Actually, it's a tractable system, which will have a link here. If you want to get the deck, you can go check out Tractable AI or just look it up on the web. They're using a system of millions of photographs that is specifically for the auto industry of damaged cars to try to figure out how the estimating is going to be improved or repairability. And they want to know just how to deal with autos because it's a big business. State Farm's using a little bit, but it looks like Geico is going to be the one that really is going to take the lead in the industry. Warren Buffett used to not like technology very much. You can tell, it's an old school guy. He thought it wasn't that useful. He kind of was holding off on a type of technology called telematics, where they monitor vehicles, speed, rates of where they are, things used in the trucking industry and so on. But he's come to realize this is a good thing. So as a major investor through his investment group that owns Geico, he's going to he said it's a good thing to do this. So he's on board, and if Warren's on board, I think everybody should probably follow Warren because he's been doing pretty well over the years. So how do we turn this into ITIL? Well, we look at the pattern recognition, and we have to think about how to manage the capacity for that. So ITIL addresses a number of steps for looking at capacity management, the types of trends that are necessary, storage and network capabilities. We look at things that are patterns and incidents and problems. We might be able to use AI on a service desk. If you have thousands of incidents coming in a larger organization, we can look at those incidents and maybe try to detect a certain pattern behind some of them, and then group them together and call it a problem because there might be a root cause or a particular type of maybe a hard drive or something, or a cable type that is failing for some reason. And we just didn't know that. But when we apply some pattern recognition to the incidents, we find them. So we can even do it to tasks which are useful to automate and looking for things. So it helps us by detecting patterns. It can also be used in security management, like I said, with fraud detection, some sort of penetration detection. We definitely need it for knowledge management. Because we need to understand how to manage the overwhelming amount of data that's going to be available to us. All about measurement and reporting. Each one of these management points that we have here is one of the 34 practices within ITIL. Measurement and reporting I find to be very strong as a management practice that we need to deal with. So you might even design some new type of workforce structure to help us reduce the number of menial jobs and try to automate those, and then develop new positions based around the management of those things and the scripting and the ordering of that, so that we use AI more effectively. And that improves the ability to use more data in our services, which means we'd have to redesign a service. So you can see that there's a number of management practices that are necessary to really make AI work successfully. And I think that ITIL really addresses quite a few of those. Levi Strauss that we just saw back a while, where they were wanting to make pricing decisions and looking at the different types of market opportunities. They would probably delve into and look at knowledge management, the types of projects that they had on the currently, and maybe what they'd like to have, which is a management practice of strategy called portfolio management. They'd want to look at how they invested into these services, and that would be a financial management aspect, which is another one. And of course, strategy management, because they felt it was necessary after COVID to finally move in and become a leader into using AI. So they've used, I think, a few other ones early on, but ITIL addresses both the strategic level as well as the tactical level of actually developing and planning, as well as the operational types of management practices. And you can see that over and over again, that just because you say AI doesn't mean you're going to use one or two practices. You'll probably end up using over half of the practices when it comes down to how it's going to be affecting your organization. Measurement uses events, incidents, and requests, and measures the problems and takes care of those problems by coming up with how to solve problems that we've seen and how to get around them and how to make changes. So there's quite a bit of advice that is practical for ITIL students. I thought on the service desk that you might have a transactional type of robot or chatbot that is automated, that says not just hi, what's up, but has access to information that is coordinated with what you hear, and being able to go back in and saying, you know, we've got all this stuff, it can probably detect a pattern here. How about I send you some related information? This would offset the amount of work on the service desk tremendously. I haven't seen this actually in effect, but I can definitely see where it would be easily built with AI systems. Information security, definitely a way to reduce risk in threat predictions and weaknesses. So we've talked about doing any kind of fraud detection and so on, but information security is definitely a big customer for AI. And then knowledge management, I said, was probably, I think, the biggest one, because in ITIL, we think about data constantly, using a strategy of data management, but we also have to think about all this unstructured data we have and how to use it, because AI will consume anything you can feed it in order to do it. And most of AI's information that we use now is more of a visual nature. We have to think about how to combine the visual data we have with the text data and anything else. We used to use a data warehouse, which was processed before we stored it, but people have been moving into data lakes where we store it and then we process it as it comes out to be used. And now the most recent trend is a data mesh. And if you'd like to check into that, you can check into a InfoQ article that I really liked from that talks about data meshes. Workforce and talent management, that's what people think about when they hear AI. Is it going to eliminate my job or not? And you know, it's probably going to transition you into a more of a management type of role where you coordinate and work with in order to train and to keep an AI system running smoothly. It's going to be managing the knowledge that is making better decisions. And there's complex scenarios and exception handling and all sorts of things that an AI system is required to do. So we're not going to, we'll get rid of the menial stuff, which is really one of the main principles in ITIL, is to eliminate those boring, repetitious jobs and automate things when possible, making a better outcome for everybody. Well, that about wraps up my talk, seeing that ITIL is, I find, a very good way to look at the benefits that IT managers can use AI, and how we can definitely see how ITIL is going to help you understand it better. It'll direct your IT management. We can see how AI is a good tool. It's just an extension of what we currently do in predictive modeling and trend analysis. And it's kind of with a tongue in cheek that I said that maybe your business intelligence is working pretty good, but if you want something as good as a weather report to kind of help you, maybe AI can help you out too. But we want to use ITIL to help us keep on track through the types of things that are focused on in ITIL, which is the guiding principles, our practices, and the continual improvement steps that we have defined, the 7 different steps. You can find in here in the back, I've listed about a number of books that are very recent from a Wall Street Journal article that was just this weekend. You can find this Cade Metz, which was where I took a quote from, and Genius Makers. And it gives you a little hint if you'd like to do a little bit more reading from the people that were there to finding out what really is going on in artificial intelligence. That'd be the one I'd pick up myself first to see what's really going on. Or a lot of people are writing in terms of the ethics and people, you know, is this really what we want to do in computing? So you might be interested more in the human side of things. We have that. We talk about in business management, is it a good thing or not? And how to maybe prevent this threat. People keep calling it a threat, but really it's computers' gradual increase of automating things that is the threat. And it's up to you whether you see technology as increasing, being able to be more and more prevalent in business as a threat or as a real gain. And most people see it as a gain, as long as it's well managed. And there is where we'll leave it, because ITIL is going to help you manage it better, and AI is just a tool that we're going to be able to manage better with ITIL. So that concludes my talk. If you have questions, I'm happy to take them. Kira?
Doug, yeah, Doug, I don't see any in the Q&A box.
Okay. I was just very happy to go through and kind of figure out, is there, you know, some sort of connection between the two? And there definitely is. So glad to have done this for you guys.
Wasn't that fun, you guys? Thanks, Doug. We appreciate your time and knowledge. And thank you to everyone that attended and participated. We will be following up with a recording link via email for those who attended. And if you have any questions about our classes, feel free to reach out to myself or your CSS. We do have a couple different of ITIL instructors on staff, and we do run ITIL for foundations about every 3 weeks, virtually or in person. And then we also are able to deliver dedicated sessions to your organization up to groups of 12. Thank you again, and you guys have a wonderful rest of the week and a Memorial Day weekend.